From Stroke to Symphony, how a musician rebuilt his brain. Imagine dedicating your entire life to music. Every morning begins with scales. Every evening ends with melodies echoing in your mind. Your fingers fly across piano keys, or your bow glides across violin strings, as naturally as breathing. Now imagine waking up one day and your hand won't move. For a musician, it feels like losing not just an ability, but an identity. This is the story of David, a concert pianist who suffered a stroke in his mid-40s. Doctors told him he might never play again. But through the incredible power of neuroplasticity, David not only regained his ability to play, he went on to compose some of the most moving music of his life. Hook David described the first weeks after his stroke as being locked inside a silent room. He could hear music in his head, perfectly. Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven, but his right hand lay limp, unresponsive. When he tried to move it, nothing happened. It felt cruel. Music had been his language, his livelihood, his joy. And now the very instrument he used, his body, had betrayed him. Most people would have resigned themselves to a life without music. But David believed something different, that the brain could learn again, and he was right. What a stroke does to the brain. Let's pause here for a little science. A stroke happens when blood flow to part of the brain is interrupted, either by a clot or a bleed. Without oxygen, brain cells die within minutes. For David, the stroke damaged part of his motor cortex, the area that controls voluntary movement. That's why his right hand stopped working. Now here's the key point. Once neurons die, they don't come back. That's why for so long, doctors believed recovery after stroke was limited. But here's the miracle. Other parts of the brain can take over. Neighboring neurons or even regions on the opposite hemisphere can build new pathways to restore lost functions. That's neuroplasticity in action. David's first steps at first. David could barely move a finger. His therapist placed a small wooden block in his palm and said, "Try to close your hand around it." It took all his concentration. His hand twitched, trembled, then froze. Sweat dripped down his forehead from the effort. It felt hopeless, but the therapist smiled. "That's progress. Your brain just sent a signal. We'll build from here." And so began months of painstaking practice. Tiny exercises, lifting a finger, squeezing a ball, tapping on a table. Each movement carved a faint new pathway in his brain. David compared it to walking through a forest. At first there was no trail, just thick weeds, but every step I took made a faint path, and the more I walked it, the clearer it became. Music as medicine. David had one secret weapon, music itself. Even when his hand couldn't play, he practiced mentally. He would sit at the piano, close his eyes, and imagine pressing the keys. He visualized every detail, the feel of the ivory, the weight of the hammers, the sound of each note. This wasn't just daydreaming. Studies show that mental practice activates the same neural circuits as physical practice. By imagining himself playing, David was priming his brain for movement. Slowly, the two began to merge. One day, as he visualized a scale, his finger twitched in perfect rhythm. It was small, but it was hope. The frustration of recovery, make no mistake. This wasn't a smooth journey. Some days David felt unstoppable. He'd manage a whole chord with his right hand. Other days his fingers felt like lead again. Progress was painfully slow. He battled depression, anger, and exhaustion. Friends told him maybe it was time to let go of music, to accept a quieter life. But David refused. He taped a note above his piano. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time he felt like giving up, he read that phrase and pushed through. The breakthrough one morning, about a year after his stroke, David sat at the piano and tried something new. Instead of focusing on speed or accuracy, he played one note, just middle C, with his right hand. It sounded shaky, uneven. But as the note hung in the air, tears filled his eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was music. From that day, things accelerated. His brain had found a way through. With practice, he rebuilt chords, then scales, then full pieces. 2 years after his stroke, David performed publicly again. Not the virtuosic concertos of his past, but a simple, soulful piece he had composed during his recovery. He called it the second chance. The audience gave him a standing ovation, not just for the music, but for the resilience it represented. What science tells us, David's recovery mirrors what research shows about stroke rehabilitation. Repetition is key. Every attempt, no matter how small, reinforces new pathways. Task-specific practice works best. Practicing the exact skill you want to regain, like piano playing, strengthens relevant circuits. Visualization enhances recovery. Mental rehearsal primes the brain to reconnect. Emotions matter. Motivation, joy, and purpose accelerate neuroplasticity. In fact, brain scans of stroke survivors show that after months of rehab, different brain areas light up when they move, proof that new regions have taken over lost functions. The musician's message David often tells young musicians and stroke survivors alike, don't think of your brain as broken. Think of it as a piano with some broken keys. You can still make music, and with enough practice, even the broken keys can be tuned again. Lessons for all of us, Evan. If you've never had a stroke, David's journey has powerful lessons. Challenge your brain. Learning something hard, like an instrument, builds resilience that can protect you later. Never underestimate visualization. Your imagination is a training ground for your brain. Progress is non-linear. Some days will feel like setbacks, but every attempt still wires growth. Purpose fuels plasticity. David's love of music gave him the drive to keep going. Find your music, the thing worth rewiring for, the symphony of neuroplasticity. The human brain is the most extraordinary instrument ever created. Unlike a piano, it doesn't just play notes, it rewrites itself, again and again, adapting to loss, challenge, and change. David's story reminds us that recovery isn't about going back to who we were, it's about becoming someone new. His music after the stroke was different, slower, deeper, more emotional. But in many ways it was more beautiful than before. That's the gift of neuroplasticity. It doesn't just restore, it transforms. Closing in CTSO the next time you feel stuck, or hear someone say, "Hey, it's too late for me." Think of David at his piano pressing middle C with trembling fingers, building a new symphony from silence. Because no matter what you've lost, your brain has the power to rebuild. If this story inspired you, and you want to hear more incredible journeys of healing, resilience, and the brain's endless adaptability, then hit subscribe to our channel. Together, we'll keep exploring the symphony of the human mind.